Okay, thumbs up from the back. Let's roll. So today we are going to talk about the next application security frontier, AI-ready API defense. And for those of you who are in the middle, as all of us are, of the AI hype cycle, we are going to try to keep it grounded with what's real and not talk about AI-powered toothbrushes and AI-powered whatever, right? It's actually a thing, it's actually happening, it's actually going to be very transformative. And in much the way that Marc Andreessen said in 2011 that software is eating the world, I think he was right. I would also add to that with my own edit that since 2011, APIs have eaten software, and AI is about to eat everything and spawn even more APIs. So this is the subject that we're going to talk about today. How do you get ready for it? What do you do? So forth and so on. But before we get into that.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Byron McNaught. Just want to introduce myself. I'm in marketing at F5. Been in lots of different roles. And while new to F5, Chuck has had a number of roles in the industry. So hopefully, putting our minds together, this is an interesting, engaging, and get some key takeaways back to you. And the lawyer said that you had to read this slide, not me.
We're all about liability protection. So thank you, Byron. Yeah, my name's Chuck Herron. I just sold my company to F5. It was an API security company called WIB. It doesn't stand for anything. It was just a three-letter.com, and those are hard to come by. So one of our guys had it. That's what we went with. And so I joined F5 in January. But while my company was young, I am not. I've been a CISO for 19 years in financial services, banking, insurance, and so forth. And actually, with some of the co-founders of WIB, like the CTO of Israel's National Cyber Directorate and a couple of others, started WIB because I had just built a digital bank in Dallas. And as we were preparing for our regulatory scrutiny, I realized we couldn't really see everything we needed to be able to see in a modern online banking architecture. So when we built it, we had nothing on premises. I said at the time, if I never see another depreciation schedule in my life, I'll die happy. And so we built everything cloud-based. The whole ecosystem was APIs. We're going to talk a little bit about threat modeling and how you need to understand your assets, actors, interfaces, and actions for threat modeling, especially when preparing for regulatory scrutiny. And with APIs, that's very, very difficult. So we're going to talk about how you get your arms around that, and then how do you catch up and keep up with the speed of development and what we think is happening next, not only in the API space, but with the rise of AI, not only for defenders, but equally and possibly more notably for attackers. So that's what we're going to cover today. So,
yeah, Chuck just pretty much captured it. So there's a lot to talk about here. So we're trying not to go too fast, but we definitely want to make sure you at least are aware of how we see things. And this is, again, it's not just me, F5, though I do work for F5. Chuck was on the other side as a defender for many years, and he signed off on every single slide. They're not mine. But we're getting into things like risks, complexity, current state, and how everything is going to basically get worse because of AI. Risk is going to expand. Complexity is going to continue to be a problem. Architectural sprawl, tool sprawl, roles and responsibilities. AI is basically sort of, taking the baton, if you will, from API security. But because APIs are the conduit to the business logic that's now exposed through the interfaces with generative AI, it's all related. So hopefully that's going to be your key takeaway. Not to scare you, there's a lot of here of, hey, let's not forget fundamentals. Like, hey, we do know how to address this problem.
Yeah, if you're looking for FUD, you're in the wrong session. With API security and the rise of AI, all I have to do is tell the truth. You remember Harry Truman's old speech? They give him hell, Harry. He's like, I just tell them the truth and they think it's hell. That's kind of the world that CISOs are living in today. So, funny thing happened on the way to the cloud. Byron can tell you about that.
And I'm trying not to drop F5 in every other sentence, but hopefully this is related for context. So I was at F5 when there was a lot of noise about everything's going to be in the cloud. Hardware vendors in the data center are going to go away. F5 is a dinosaur. So there was that sort of pressure, but that's not what happened. What happened is what you see here, what we're going to call the ball of fire. And of course, as with everything, Chuck has riffed on it and evolved it even further. But This is literally, and this is not just me saying so, this is just confirmed as it is every year through our customer survey, the State of Application Strategy. The number of customers that are deployed, F5 customers, which span all verticals and industries, that are deployed in multiple environments, that continues to expand. We're not talking about either data center or cloud. We're talking about data center and cloud, probably multiple clouds because of DR or acquisition or tooling. Also moving to the edge, primarily for use cases involving AI. And so this is usually what you find in the actual customer deployment. And if you look at those lines, I know there's a lot to parse. You got some, the attackers and the different environments, but the underlying fabric that's connecting everything, those are the APIs. So we're about to level set about what is an API, but just know that APIs are one of the primary drivers of the ball of fire, of risk,
Right.
of complexity. And we expect that to continue because, again, APIs are what connects generative AI ecosystems.
Right on. Thank you, Byron. So we all thought it was going to look like the left-hand side of the slide. We're going to go to the cloud. And what happened in reality is we went to clouds. And the on-premises stuff never went away. So it's just add, 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 add. I think once in my 20-year career did we actually retire the mainframe. And that was because the controls were so behind, it was indefensible. Like we were trying to take a company public, we just couldn't do it, right? So the on-premises stuff is still there. And if you think of F5 primarily as an on-premises company, you would be right in that we are still excellent at that. We sell over $1 billion a year in hardware, but over the last 5 to 7 years, we have invested heavily in software. So we own Nginx, which is the most powerful and popular web server in the world. It's also a very popular API gateway. And with F5 Distributed Cloud, our goal is to help tame this ball of fire by adding simplicity. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But we are about half hardware and half software now. And every day, the way that I characterize it is we sort of say a technology serenity prayer on the behalf of our customers. Help us understand what our customers can change. Help us understand what they can't change and deal with it and meet them where they are, and hopefully be wise enough to know the difference, right? So when we get into things like the speed of development and on-premises workloads, let's say, for example, if you're a CISO and you want to remove and retire your on-premises legacy architecture and infrastructure, you probably would have done that already. If you haven't done that yet, it's kind of outside of your control. So us, if we're trying to bring simplicity and speed and efficacy to your security program, we have to realize that and meet you where you are. So we're not going away from the on-premises stuff at any time, but we're also adding now the ability to generate and manage security in these multiple clouds. So if you only know us for our on-premises architecture, that's because that's what your attack surface used to be. And in a lot of cases, that's not going anywhere. But your attack surface now looks much different. It looks much more like this ball of fire. And so our CEO, Francois, he coined the term ball of fire. And when I was thinking of joining F5 and then ultimately did, that really resonated with me. Because as a defender and as a CISO, this complexity has become untenable. Mm-hmm. It's too complicated. And it's not just the technology complexity. It's not just technology, right? If you think, the old Bruce Schneier quote that I love so much, if you think that technology can solve your security problems, you don't understand the technology and you don't understand the problems. There are people and process issues that come from this level of complexity as well. So when you still have your on-premises infrastructure, say you've got your I-Series or your Z-Series, your Big Iron, your systems of record, things like that, try to move those guys into 2-week sprints. See how that goes. It's a complete waste of time. Right? So now we have high-speed IT, low-speed IT, systems of engagement versus systems of record, systems on the edge. And from a governance perspective, when you're trying to manage internal processes and control over software development, it gets very difficult. When you move into multiple clouds, and one of our big customers, I'll leave their name quiet just because I don't have their permission to use it and it wouldn't be appropriate anyway, but it's a big bank, and they have spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars going into one of the big hyperscalers. And now they're finding that the AI offerings for that particular hyperscaler are limited, and now they're looking at the others. So even in organizations that exercise a tremendous and unusual amount of discipline to stick to their one cloud provider idea, they find after several years that multi-cloud winds up being, fortunately or unfortunately, inevitable. And so then you have to deal with the complexity of things like, okay, now I've got to have an AWS Center of Excellence and an Azure Center of Excellence and a Google Center of Excellence, and they all have different technology stacks, and not all of them work the same, and so you have different resultant sets of policy. So when you move an app or an API from one environment to another, you're not quite sure if the security controls are the same way. And it's a very, very complicated environment. And it's not like we're all swimming with resumes of qualified people that are looking for work in InfoSec. There are millions of unfilled jobs in InfoSec, and that's not going away anytime soon. So the ball of fire from a technology complexity, in my experience, at least what I'm calling the ball of pain. It's a pretty tough place to be right now. And so our goal is to try to make that simpler.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a lot about AI, but we're also going to make sure we're keeping the context because, for example, there's AI in security products at this point. It's kind of table stakes, how you do behavioral analytics. I can have a dynamic signature based on behavior instead of relying on a threat feed. But we're also talking about generative AI. And yes, generative AI democratizes what attackers can do, increases their sophistication, but as defenders, it's going to help us simplify, streamline, help with things that Chuck was talking about, right? Like I can't imagine we're going to ever have equilibrium in terms of the number of security jobs available and the number of people willing to take them. It's going to continue to be imbalanced, but AI perhaps can come to the rescue. So we've been talking a lot about APIs, and we don't want to make assumptions. RSA is a huge show. Perhaps you're focused on a different part of security. And I can tell you my own personal experience coming here many times. 5 years ago, walking the booth, listening to talks, yeah, maybe you heard API security. You didn't really hear AI other than how we're using it in our defenses, but it wasn't prominent. That's changed. It's very prominent. And so kind of curious, Chuck, why you think that is, and then how would you explain APIs to my mom?
Right on. So let's start with level set. What is an API? Without getting into all the details about the differences between REST and gRPC and GraphQL and the other things. Essentially, an API is an interface. The I in API stands for interface, right? Application Programming Interface. And APIs themselves aren't new. They go back to IBM in the 1940s. But I'm going to talk through some of why APIs are suddenly a problem that was 20 years in the making. We just didn't really see it coming. But at the core, an API is just a way to exchange information or invoke function based on common agreements called a contract. And so if you remember the days back in, say, the late 90s, early 2000s, if you're a graybeard like me, then you remember the integration projects where you had to have all kinds of detailed information about, what languages is the other side running, right? You got a new HR system, you have a 6-month integration project. What APIs allow you to do is abstract all of that stuff. It doesn't matter anymore. So you can think of it like a power outlet. You know what you're going to get when you plug in to this standardized interface, right? So if in the US you get 120 volts at 60 hertz, if in the EU you get 230 volts at 50 hertz, you know what you're going to get. And you don't have to care as much anymore about, is this powered by wind, nuclear, coal, solar, a hamster on a bicycle? It doesn't matter anymore because you can abstract that technology behind it. And that allows the developers teams to not only be more self-sufficient and run at their own pace. Some things may need updating more quickly than others, but they also can use the languages they want to use. They can use the frameworks they want to use. It opens up a lot of possibilities for developers to move more quickly. That's a good thing? Usually. It can be a bad thing. So making data exchange really easy, it's great for good purposes. It's also really great for bad purposes. And there are certain habits that, that developers and others fall into of, I don't want to say lazy, but yeah, lazy, of doing the least amount to get the maximum benefit, right? So we see over and over again things like you have something that's got a lot of data available. Just pull all the data and then filter it at the UI. Right? That's a lot of data exposure. And the tools, I'll talk a little bit about in a second, were not really designed for this. So here's what I think happened. Here's what I think happened historically. And this sort of traces back, my career as a CISO. Back in 2000, Salesforce, who calls themselves the original cloud company, and they certainly were one of the first, they started selling an API as part of a product in about the year 2000. So we're going to go back to there. So like I said, APIs go back till the 1940s, but it was really in 2000 where we started selling them as products. Now, very closely following this, we had major companies like Google and Amazon dictate API-first methodologies. Everything's going to be done by API. Everything's going to be done by API. Now, security at the time wasn't really focused on this. And really, the first time that we had OWASP API Top 10 came way, way later. I'll talk about that in a second. The next trend, though, that started was in 2001. The very next year, we saw the Agile Manifesto published. And that was all about making development quicker, speed to value, right? So now we're talking about sprints, and this didn't happen instantaneously, but between 2005 and 2015, more and more companies started embracing this. Some of them were good at it, most weren't. And they wound up, doing Wagile and, waterfall with agile characteristics and all kinds of, hybrid things, which made governance much more difficult. In 2002, we saw the launch of AWS, which for the first time allowed developers to bypass infrastructure and security bottlenecks. So now you want to stand up a VM, go do it yourself. Pop down your credit card, you're off and running. You want a database? Go do it yourself. You don't have to wait for security and infrastructure. And that proliferation of sort of shadow IT and personal credit cards and so forth really led to an increase in developer speed. And that's really where security and development started getting more divided. The next year, 2003, was when we saw the first OWASP Web Top 10. We're going to talk about the various top 10s and maybe the top 10s on a future slide. But then we started actually understanding application vulnerabilities. Now, this list is not new. This has been around for over 20 years, and it's the same things over and over and over again. Number 6 goes to number 4 goes to number 7, but it's input sanitization, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, SSRF. It's these things that are well understood, right? But back in those days, we were just figuring out application security. We're just figuring out internet security. We're just figuring out cloud security. So we were totally occupied as defenders with this stuff that's going on. Meanwhile, we've got the iPhone launch in 2007, the mobile revolution, starting really even more proliferation of APIs. And so we talk about, Byron asked, why is this suddenly an issue just in the last 5 years? This was a sudden issue that was 20 years in the making. But we got on the wrong side as defenders of the exponential growth curve. We got on the wrong side of the S-curve. That's the thing about S-curves is they're hard to time. You know that it's eventually going to happen, but when the first API security company started being formed back in the 2014, 2015 days, the people that formed them were former attackers. And so the US, Israel, some allies had been attacking APIs as part of their offensive operations. These are many of the folks that I work with. And when they finished their service, they figured out there's got to be a market for this. We're operating completely undetected with impunity. There's got to be a market for this, right? Because we're going everywhere, nobody can see what we're doing. They were right. There is a market for this, but they were early. This is 10 years ago. So nobody was buying yet because we didn't understand the problem yet. Now, if you look to 2022, you see when it comes to securing software development, we've got 82% hybrid, 16% agile, and 2% waterfall. Now, I'm not saying you can't secure hybrid or agile development. I am saying you can't secure it in the same way that you secure waterfall development. Process matters, and how do you get your shims in there? So by the time we finally got the first OWASP API Top 10 in 2019, API traffic was already the majority of traffic on the internet. And right now, depending on whose stats you listen to and what quarter it is, API traffic is somewhere between 80 and 91% of web traffic. And our own stats from F5 Labs shows that 92% of the attacks that we see against the F5 distributed cloud are against API endpoints. So I'm going to make a statement now that may sound a little controversial, but bear with me and I'll try to explain it. I don't think API security ever should have existed as a separate category. What happened was security and development got so far apart that startups rushed in to fill the gap, and what we're seeing now is the inevitable industry consolidation as bigger players buy the smaller players and some of the players go out of business. But really, we're just talking about modern app security. Almost all modern app development is API. You've got entire architectural patterns like the Jamstack, JavaScript, APIs, markup language. That's your app. It's 90% of attacks. We're still thinking of this as defenders as a niche within AppSec. But when it's 90% of traffic and 90% of attacks, that's modern architecture. That's infrastructure. And the rise of AI is only going to make it worse because that's how the models work. So we have a scenario now where we have defenders, even now in 2024, that are unaware of how many APIs they have, or even that API security is something they should be worried about. This is an absolutely true story, and I'm going to protect his name because A, it's rude, and B, I like the guy. But a guy that I used to work with at AIG 20 years ago, he is now the CISO for a big financial services company on Wall Street, and we were talking about what I was working on. This is 6 months ago, maybe 7. And I said, hey, what are you doing with APIs? He said, yeah, we don't really have any. We're thinking about it. We're thinking about getting into it. And I said, Brad, you've got 3 mobile apps that I know of. How do you think they work? Like, it just hasn't been on the radar until all of a sudden it's a big deal. And I think part of the problem is that we don't normally think of growth in exponential terms. We don't gain and lose weight exponentially. We gain and lose weight linearly. We don't speed up and slow down exponentially, unless you're my wife. You do that linearly, right? And so I used to be an 8th grade math teacher, and the way that I would communicate concepts about exponential growth to the 8th graders was I would say, okay, imagine that you've got a pond, and in the corner of that pond is a tiny little lily pad. Now that lily pad is going to grow exponentially until on day 30, on 30 days, it's going to completely cover that pond. And I would ask my kids, so at what time during this 30 days will the lily pad cover half the pond? And what do you think?
Well, I grew up in Florida, and I would literally sit at the lake and just watch the lily pad grow. I didn't get this question right, so I knocked him on the API security quiz. I figured it was linear, right? Yeah. Like you just take the size it's going to be and what day we're on and, do some basic math. But as Chuck's going to explain.
So like 15 days, right?
Yeah,
15 days is halfway across the pond. Next 15 days is going to cover the pond. Well, the real answer is day 29. On the 29th day of 30, the lily pad covers half the pond. On day 28, it covers 25% of the pond. On day 27, it covers 12.5% of the pond. So if you back up a week on day 24, you literally have 80% of your time elapsed for this particular S-curve, but you're only covering 1.6% of the pond. This is my thesis for what happened with APIs. They started growing 20 years ago, and then suddenly it looks like an explosion, and that's because of the nature of exponential growth. So now, all of a sudden, the last couple of years, API security is this new hot thing. APIs aren't new. And in fact, the guys that I've worked with, we've been attacking them for 15 years in their offensive operations. We're just now catching up because now you can't ignore 90% of traffic and 90% of the attacks, right? So what we used to think of as a niche is really, truly modern infrastructure. APIs are
This sounds familiar with something else that's happening right now that we're kind of talking about.
Oh, yeah.
We know it's there, we know it's growing, maybe we're not taking it seriously, and then what's going to happen?
Yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen.
We're talking
right?
about AI, generative AI in particular.
And so we built a scenario here to talk about, how do you secure things at this pace, at this speed? And so if you guys remember back to the days where, we all had monolithic apps, and some of us still have monolithic apps, and that's okay. But when you do these quarterly release cycles, actually security in those days was fairly straightforward in that if you have a 90-day release, quarterly release, then you can coordinate everybody at the same pace. So you would hire your pen testers, put them on a quarterly contract, right? And this is, by the way, is a wildly optimistic scenario. So what are the upsides in this scenario, right?
Yeah, I was about to say, to his point earlier, when, I was in college learning how to do waterfall when Agile was already happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, as technologists, as far ahead we want to be, we are often caught in this phenomenon. Yeah, I think this is kind of optimistic, right?
So we got to have, for this scenario to be really wildly optimistic, just to prove the point, let's assume that you have a full inventory of all your APIs, that they're all documented, and the documentation is correct, that you have a pen tester on a quarterly retainer, that the pen tester is trained on testing APIs, which, by the way, most pen testers are not. There are some that are. A good friend of mine, Corey Ball, is one. He wrote the book on it. We present a lot together. Most pen testers aren't really that good at testing APIs. They test the API through testing the mobile app or the web app, not actually attacking the API directly. So in this wildly optimistic scenario, you've still got the situation where back in the day, you could have your pen testers do the test, and then they would get the results back a couple of weeks before the release. The developers would have the information to fix, and they would fix the criticals and highs and mediums or whatever you argued about or negotiated with the head of development so they didn't miss their deadlines. And that weekend, you all ordered pizza, you put your jars and wars all in the right place, and we're all running at the same speed. It was manageable, but it was too slow. Those trends back we talked about 2000, 2001, 2002, Agile Manifesto, cloud, so forth, security is still running at this pace, but now development is running every 2 weeks.
Well, Chuck, can we just go back to waterfall and quarterly release cycles? Can that
So that's the thing about the old days. They're the old days. All of these trends are meant to speed up business value. So if you're a CISO, you have the choice. It's a choice. You can go to your business leadership and say, hey man, I can't keep up with the pace of development, so let's go back to quarterly releases. It's just not feasible anymore. So going back to the old days is not going to get us there. And even in this wildly optimistic scenario, it wouldn't work. So how do we catch up and keep up? These are the problem statements that we tried to understand when we were building WIB, which was then acquired by F5, as what are the root causes? Why? It's not just that security is behind development. Why is security behind development? And there's a lot of people and process issues with that. And so like I said earlier, if you think technology can solve all your security problems, you don't understand the problems and you don't understand technology. Thoughtful product design that understands root causes actually can help defenders address those root causes. So for example, one of my mentors at AIG told me years ago, and I've never forgotten this, in the first 5 minutes of a meeting when everybody else is making small talk, look around the table and say, how can I get what he wants? Or how can he get what he wants? How can she get what she wants? How can he get what he wants? And if you can figure out a way to get them what they want, they'll figure out how to get you what you want. So when you're trying to bring developers and security back together, we kind of have to answer the what's in it for me question. Yeah. We as defenders have earned the right to be excluded by slowing things down, by not understanding software development, not understanding the problems and the challenges, not understanding the pressures that they're under. You get excluded. They're under date pressure, they're under delivery pressure. So if we're going to bring folks together, we have to give them some incentive to do it. So by doing things like examining source code to identify APIs and then automatically generating API documentation, hey, are you interested in doing less work? Every developer in the world says, why, yes, I am. That's kind of my forte, is doing less work. This is why I automate everything. So what's in it for me? Also, do you like it when we send you false positives, or would you rather us vet out these false positives and send you actionable stuff? Yeah, right on. Yeah, absolutely. Help me out. So if we can meet mutual stakeholder advantages and provide those advantages to these multiple parties, then we're more likely to be able to help solve the people and process issues that if we don't solve are only going to get worse. So this trend that we were talking about with the, put that back down. So I'm from Texas, y'all. You have to bear with me. I talk funny. But if we're dealing with this problem, we can't just imagine that that's going to solve itself. We have to increase the speed of security. We can't go the other way because this is never getting slower. Yeah. It's as fast as it's ever been, and it's as slow as it's ever going to be. So we have to just acknowledge that. This is that technology serenity prayer I was talking about earlier. We can't ask our customers to slow down to get ahead of their API security or catch up and keep up. So this kind of brings us to current state.
We got this, right? Just in all your environments, just have an infrastructure and security stack, the tools that you like, and just make sure everybody's on the same page, right? We got this.
Absolutely. This is easy. Quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar with or exercise in regular threat modeling? Awesome. That's like half the room. That's more than half the room. I love RSA. You asked that question in the average place, and it's like, the what? So for threat modeling, you guys, I mentioned before that I'm old. You really have to understand 4 things: assets, actors, interfaces, and actions. Imagine trying to keep a threat model up to date with this type of sprawl and this type of complexity. It's not possible. And especially when you're in a regulated state, ask your primary regulators, how many blind spots are acceptable? Not many. And the fact is, if you don't know all of your interfaces, and friendly reminder that the I in API stands for interface, if you don't know all your interfaces, you have an incomplete threat model. It's not a judgment on you as a person, it's just a statement of fact. Assets, actors, interfaces, and actions. Who's doing what to what via what? And there's no way to keep track of this level of complexity manually. It's just not a thing. And it's never going to slow down so that you can catch up again and do this on Excel spreadsheets. Now, something that a lot of defenders miss is that securing APIs is different. Another quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar with the OWASP API Top 10 as opposed to the OWASP Web Top 10? 1. Not quite as many. Not bad, not bad. More than the average room, for sure. So in 2019, we saw the release of the first OWASP API Top 10. And what really differentiates API vulnerabilities from the traditional web app vulnerabilities are attacks on business logic. So SQL injection, cross-site scripting, these attack types still work against API endpoints, and we use them in our offensive operations all the time. But what's different are new attack types that WAFs and API gateways were never really designed to understand, and that's because these are programmatic extensions, programmatic interfaces. So things like broken object level authorization, you may hear BOLA banded around, right? Broken object property level authorization, BOPLA, which is an awkward, thank you, which is an awkward acronym, broken function level authorization. If you're not testing for these things, and many times you need to test with these things in a totally different way than your static analysis and even dynamic analysis for the web apps, you need to use multiple sets of credentials and then try to test the scoping, try to test the bounds, right? So developers have gotten pretty good at requiring authentication and tend to, what's the technical term for this, suck at authorization. So yes, you have to have a key to go into the hotel, right? That key should also only open your door. That's the problem. Most of the time, if you notice, the common A in all those BOLA, BOPLA, BFLA is authorization. So you got a key, yep, but that key opens every door. And that key is stored in my mobile app, which I can very easily decompile and reverse engineer, and then I've got the key. So welcome, I'm enjoying staying at your hotel.
Well, Chuck, can't we just do things like CAPTCHA or MFA?
Yeah,
APIs?
absolutely. You can do that. And we've got a lot of actual really interesting research about the ineffectiveness of CAPTCHA and how CAPTCHA farms make it completely ineffective for all but the most casual of attackers. So we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about the state of API security and where things are going. But one thing that we know, especially in automated attacks, which is almost all attacks now, the top 10% of attackers cause 90% of the damage. So if you've got an automation problem, I'm going to walk through a common attack pattern with how that works. But you need to be, strapping up to fight Mike Tyson, not, running on the treadmill and eating vegetables, 3 times a week, right? These are real players that are very dangerous. And securing APIs is different, right? So the mobile app, I'm gonna get into more details on the mobile app in a second, but you're calling multiple APIs from that mobile app, and they live in different places, all from the same place. And when you think about API security and the way that the first generation players addressed the problem, they were very, very traffic specific and traffic focused. Now, that makes sense in a lot of ways. That's where the attacks happen, right? But the number of cars on Mission Street is not the same as the number of cars in San Francisco. And we see these common issues over and over again where I'll see, like, for example, V4 in a path. Well, if there's a V4, any attackers in the audience want to tell me what else there is? There's a V3. It's probably a V2. Probably nobody's paying attention, right? So this type of orphan APIs, shadow APIs, zombie APIs that somebody wrote 6 years ago, they're not with the company anymore, nobody knows they're there. You have to discover early and discover often with APIs, all the way from code to the traffic to the edge, to the outside world. What does your attack surface look like to the outside? And then when you're building this in, we talk about the OWASP top 10. Which top 10 are you talking about?
Greatest hits.
Yeah, we put on the top of the slide, the top 10 top 10s, right? So now we've got the ML top 10, the mobile top 10, the LLM top 10, the web top 10, the API security top 10. This is just a symptom of the complexity of the operating environment that we find ourselves in now. So if your SDLC processes are focused only on the web top 10, you're going to have a bad time. And I quoted this gentleman from Google Cloud, and I want to tie this back to the rise of AI because there's definitely a theme here. I'm going back into the yesteryear to talk about how we got here, and I'm hoping that the audience here takes that and says, I don't want to do that again when it comes to AI, which is going even faster than the adoption of APIs. So if you haven't been able to catch up and keep up yet, buckle up, because it's only getting faster, right? And so as this guy said from Google Cloud, no matter how you're using Gen AI, at the end of the day, you're calling a REST endpoint. You're using APIs, and that's how they're going to work. Further, it's going to change the landscape of how we need to detect attacks. So right now, there's a lot of energy put into separating human from bot. But think about when you go and you make a query, just let's say your average retail person, right, $20 subscription to GPT-4. When you ask it to do research on your behalf, it's a bot, right? The AI automation, automating business processes, that looks like a bot. So now we're not only going to have to discern humans from bots, but good bots from bad bots. And how do you do that? When you can't discern intent necessarily, you're not seeing the original prompt. Defenses are going to get even trickier and even more automated and even more at scale. And that leads us to this adoption of generative AI. This is what we're This is what really caught our eyes. When you think of how far behind the curve we got as defenders when it came just to APIs, and actually, it's not just APIs. I was on the forefront of rolling out the first desktops at a major bank that I shall not name that's based in Charlotte, North Carolina, about 25 years ago. And we didn't know anything about desktop security. Everybody had local admin rights. Like we literally rolled out Windows 2000 desktops and then put a 5250 emulator to log back into the mainframe from the dumb terminal that we just replaced. So now everybody's got admin rights, everybody's surfing the web, everybody's got email on their desktop now with full admin rights. Like, we always adopt technology before we secure it. We did the same thing when we went to the internet, we went to the same thing when we did to the cloud, we did the same thing with APIs, we're doing the same thing with AI. But the problem is it just keeps getting faster and faster. So much like a one-legged man chasing a rabbit, I told you I was from Texas. The longer we stay behind, the further apart we get. So it's not enough to say, hey, you need to slow down so we can catch up. And we also don't want to trade supply chain risk for API risk or AI risk. So as you're thinking about the way that you do this, I'm staying clear of pitching products and things, but you need to think about how these technologies work together. And so I'll talk about a common attack pattern here in a second. So what we're seeing in API security right now, the sector is consolidating. I'm coming back to my thesis. We get back together in 3 years, come up and tell me whether I was right or wrong. I think API security as a sector is declining as we consolidate. F5 purchased Wib. Another major announcement was made yesterday. The industry is going to continue to consolidate, and because your defense needs to be informed by the offense, the way that attacks on APIs work, API security as a standalone piece of a tech stack really makes very little sense. So think about a common attack pattern. I've got it here in the middle. I'll take your API, or I'm sorry, your mobile app, I'll download it from Google Play. I'll put it in either, APK leaks or MobSF or something. I'll decompile, reverse engineer, decompose your mobile app. I get your API keys, I get your strings, your base64 encoded strings, your backend API information, path information, sometimes literally like email addresses for internal people, all kinds of stuff in mobile apps when you start breaking them apart. Then I'll use credentials that I either stole myself or I bought on the dark web, and I use bots to automate the attacks against API endpoints. So we've got a mobile security problem, we've got a bot problem, we've got an API problem, and then what typically happens, and this is a pattern that we see over and over again, the early attackers are kind of slow and low because they're good, they're skilled. They understand that they don't want to be detected because then the party's over. Well, as the word gets out on the underground that this company, this bank, or this airline, or whatever they're trying to steal, however they're trying to monetize it, right? So airline miles, for example, whatever they're stealing. As word gets out that this company has an automation problem and a vulnerability here, lower skilled actors start piling on. And that credential stuffing attack turns into a denial of service attack. And many times that's the first indication that a company has that they've got a problem, but that is a lagging indicator of attacks that have been going on usually for weeks to months. So the first time the defenders understand they've got a problem is because business is interrupted. Now you got a DDoS problem. So think of the technology stack that you really need to assemble for defense in depth. You need to secure the mobile apps to cut off the source of all the information and credentials, API keys and so forth. You need bot defense that can discern good traffic from bad traffic. And that's why we bought Shape a couple years ago for $1 billion. You've got API attacks, so you need to understand what's going on with your API traffic, what normal traffic looks like, what abnormal traffic looks like, what you're exposing to the outside. Are you exposing multiple versions of the same API on purpose, and so forth and so on. And you need DDoS protection. These things need to work together. So from a supply chain risk perspective, when we were talking about not trading one set of risks for another, it can be sort of like walking into the ocean, from the beach, and you got the air coming up and trying to push air out of your bathing suit. You trade one risk for another, right? Don't trade supply chain risk to try to secure your APIs. And while this is not a product talk, I just urge you to think about how you're managing supply chain risk and the pieces that need to work together to defend against these types of attack patterns. They need to work together. It's better if they don't come from competing companies that don't play nice. You do what you want. I'm just saying.
And this goes back to your earlier point of what if the security teams can give the developers what they want?
Yeah.
perhaps there's going to be some reciprocal action, right?
Well,
That's the way to kind of bring the teams together.
absolutely.
That's been a tough challenge, not for just F5, but the industry at large.
Absolutely right. Now, when it comes to AI, here's something that we are seeing that's very concerning. So I mentioned earlier that the top 10% of attackers cause 90% of the damages, 90% of the losses. Well, unfortunately, while we're all talking at RSA about how to use AI to protect ourselves and from a defensive position, and we do a lot of this at F5 as well, what we're seeing in the field is that the use of generative AI, all kinds of LLMs designed for malicious purposes now that you can get from anywhere, they are enabling lower skilled attackers to act like more highly skilled attackers. So essentially it's raising the bar for defenders and lowering the bar for attackers. So they're able to carry out much more sophisticated, especially with GPT-4. That was a marked improvement over 3.5 in the number of vulnerabilities it could successfully exploit. And it's only accelerating faster and faster. So if you've got an automation problem, if you've got an API problem, it's only getting faster right now. So how do we catch up and keep up? Well, we mentioned earlier that you need to have security at the speed of development. One-legged men and rabbits, right? The longer we stay apart, the further apart we're going to get. But that's not enough. We also need to add simplicity. Complexity is the enemy of security. Bruce Schneier first said that in, I think, 1999. It was 25 years ago. Can you think of how much simpler the world was 25 years ago? And is it going to get simpler in the next 25? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to slow down. I don't think it's going to get easier. So we have to take these root causes and understand them, and then figure out how do we add simplicity? How do we expose the same attack surface wherever an app or API is published? How do we know and not deal with the variabilities from each of the hyperscalers and their tool stacks, right? So Google is spending a lot of money on security. I'm not knocking any of them. Microsoft spends a lot of money on security. They're having a bit of a tough time right now, admittedly. But they are mostly focused on securing things in their environment. You don't go to Google to secure your Azure environment. And we've seen that multi-cloud is ultimately inevitable because no one cloud provider is good for everything you need to do. You've got workloads that may make more sense to run in one than the other. So we have to meet, we at F5 now have taken up the charge of meeting our customers where they are. And then when we talk about using ML and AI to do that, we are building that into our technology stack as well. I'll turn it over to Bob.
Yeah, so we're going to get into the Gen AI, but just to level set, AI and security is not new. In fact, with F5, is anybody familiar with ASM, the acronym? So that's the Web Application Firewall, awesome. 2006 was the launch of Policy Builder. That was truly the first stage of machine learning within F5 security. But how are we going to simplify complexity, mitigate risk, deal with the staffing shortages? That's going to be where generative AI comes in and leads the pack. And what I'm talking about is not just, for example, using the AI to get really good at detecting attacks, using the AI to get really good at deploying the countermeasures, making it easy to actually understand what's happening, what's in place to prevent bad outcomes, and then how can we get better. So we at F5, the way we do this within our own distributed cloud is something we call the AI Data Fabric. It's using a variety of large language models in a distributed cloud, and the telemetry that we can glean, because we have big IP in the data center, we have Nginx pretty much all over the place, we're moving to the edge. We take all that telemetry, we synthesize it, and then we expose a natural language processing interface for our defenders, where they can literally say, how many SQL injection attacks are we having? What kind of mitigation is in place? How can we make it more efficient? Fast forward to where we're going, yes, do this, boom, push of a button. Not taking humans out of the loop, but saving time, not synthesizing logs from various systems, putting it together while you have that pressure, right, while the adrenaline's running. So this is one of the things we're doing that's future-proofing not only our own platform, but ways that we're going to help streamline and simplify the life of defenders.
Right on. Yeah, so we spend a lot of time talking about and worrying about AI outsourcing jobs and AI replacing humans and things like that, and I think we're skipping a step. There's going to be a long period where it's AI augmenting humans. We are tool makers. Right, that's what we as a species are good at, and long distance running, at least theoretically, not me. But when you think of like the efficiency of motion, and you compare it to animals, we are not efficient when you compare us to horses and tuna and things like that, until you put us on a bicycle. And then we're much more efficient. And then you put us in a car, and you put us in a jet. Like, we are tool makers. So humans plus AI together are really going to be where we are for the next, I don't know how long, 5 years. We'll see. We'll see what the adoption curve looks like. This is another S-curve that's hard to predict, so I don't want to call it wrong. But we shouldn't skip that part. So human-assisted pen testing, as opposed to fully AI-driven pen testing, is kind of the next thing. We're all going to be upskilling. But if the attackers are upskilling and you are not, again, you're going to have kind of a bad time. So how do we leverage AI to deliver insights? One of the most interesting things that we do, thank you. Oh, is it Q&A time now, or is it 5 minutes to Q&A? Left total. All right, so let me shut up let me finish this up and get some Q&A. So we're using it to do all kinds of things, like Byron said, natural language questioning. How many false positives did I have? Help me generate new rules. Things that they can really take a lot of toil and burden off of defenders. This is what's being baked into our products now and what we're going to continue to do. And here's what's going to happen in API security. This is my thought. I think that API governance is going to really be the next modern attack surface management. APIs are modern infrastructure. It's how the world communicates. It's how all these apps and systems talk to each other. Governance must cover cloud and on-premises. The on-premises stuff is not going away. As much as we all want it to, it's not. And a lot of companies that did, like ill-advised cloud migrations, thinking lift and shift, are now repatriating because it's a heck of a lot cheaper to run the old stuff on-premises than it was in the cloud. You really shouldn't have gone to the cloud in the first place. You just drank the Kool-Aid, or your predecessor did, and now they're off at another job selling Kool-Aid. We have to automate the visibility, and defense in depth is critical. This statement of your defense must be informed by the offense. You need to really keep track of how the attackers are working in your industry and your sector, and make sure that you're allocating resources responsive to that. Byron and I were talking about 2011 when it was all DDoS. Right? The Iranian government and the proxies were all hitting U.S. financial interests, and I was at AIG at the time when we were all fighting DDoS. Well, that was a 13-year-ago problem. Now DDoS is largely handled. And that's not the new thing anymore, right? We have to change tactics at least every year when we do our security planning. And then there's just some security truths that, you guys are welcome to steal. I call them security truths.
I've branded the term Chuckisms, and I expect royalties if you ever use these.
But at the first, the first one at the top, that's a Bruce Schneier quote. I should have attributed him. I want to say, for anybody recording, that's not my original one. The second one, though, the regulators aren't always right, but they are undefeated. I was talking to a bank CISO today and talking about the CFPB and open banking and things like that and how they're addressing open banking regulation. He didn't agree, and so I had to regulators aren't always right, but pick your battles. They are undefeated. So these other sayings, you're welcome to, hopefully they help. But at the bottom of it, we are not automating IT anytime soon. I don't care what business you're in the people business. So understanding the people and process challenges that are leading to these gaps is essential. And while technology by itself can't solve them, technology partners that understand the root causes and work to make people and process work better, I think are to your advantage. So with that, next week, I'll let you do this. And
then we're just going to wrap up, and feel free to grab us. We'll hang out if you have questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you got to run, we understand. But yeah. What's the takeaways here? I know there's a lot of material. Clearly, we could have used about 5 more minutes, but that's okay, right? So what should you do immediately? Think about risk and complexity, how they're related, how you can take steps to get a handle on that already. If nothing else, to make sure you have a holistic approach to how you do security. Are we looking across all environment? Do we understand where our APIs are? Are we consistently protecting them? Are we prepared for the next pervasive vulnerability like Log4j when we need to remediate across the board? Right? You also need to validate your API security program and not just focus on production, but find the risks in code. Find the risks before they get in production. That should be the North Star, the ideal end game. Also, implement governance programs for API security, for safe use of AI, and also look for ways to deploy generative AI, because that's already happening on the adversarial front. Chuck mentioned it, but I actually read a research paper. It was pretty scary. It was literally a chatbot. Not, hey, go find out if this website is vulnerable to this CVE. It was, go find out how to hack this website. Trying all sorts of attacks. Injection, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, and just the sophistication of that LLM for adversarial purposes was pretty astounding. And we're just now scratching the surface.
You got it. That's exactly right. So with that, put up a ball of fire animation that I like. And if we got a couple of minutes for questions. If anybody has any questions or anything you want to dive into, we are here at your disposal. Yes, ma'am. Do we have a mic that we can pass around? Or I'll repeat the question. That's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. Well, so Google's a different matter than the average company, right? So they actually have the resources and the technology chops to invest, hundreds of millions or billions into AI. So that's a little bit different of an edge case. What I worry about more are the companies that are jumping in on the hype cycle and they don't really understand what they're doing. And it's kind of like the moving to the cloud and repatriating later. You're going to find out how important those people are, but only after they're gone. I think that's a big risk, and I think companies need to really think thoughtfully about that. There's an old saying in banking, the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. First mouse gets their heads cut off, right? So it's beneficial to be that second mouse. Now the third mouse goes hungry because the second mouse took all the food, right? So when you got to navigate those waters, but I would urge companies not to be reckless and like outsource your whole call center before you really understand what's going to happen. It's a great question. Okay. Stop. Okay, I got a big red stop.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much for your time today. I hope you have a great rest of your show, and thanks for coming.